Okay, great. So welcome again to Let's Talk Lag BOmer. So a little rundown of what we're going to do today. We're going to kind of do a very quick basic, like what is log? We did a little bit of that already. And then we're going to look at some sources. We're going to look at a source about like what is the deal with the Omer period? Why are we in mourning? And then we're going to look at a source that's connected to Lag BOmer that has a rabbi with laser eyes. And I'm very excited about that. And we're going to spend the bulk of our time on that. It's a great story. But basically a lot of this stuff around Lag BOmer, and I've been doing a deep dive into all of this, but a lot of this stuff, I don't want to say it's made up, but a lot of it, there's not kind of clear connections to things. It's like a little ambiguous. And I feel like this often happens if there's a thing that people ask about a lot and there's not a clear connection. So a lot of people ask me, okay, like why do we light bonfires on Lag BOmer? And we're gonna go over that, but it's like kind of a wishy-washy answer. It's not very satisfying. It's not very satisfying to me personally. I feel like there's something behind it, but I'm not sure what. Or like the other one is also, Shavuot's coming up, and people always ask me, why do we eat dairy on Shavuot? And I feel like that's like all of the answers they're all lovely, nice, like beautiful drashot, but they're not like real, right? They're all kind of interpretations of something. My theory is that it's the time of year, the cows are all giving birth, so it's a good dairy season, so we're like eating dairy in the dairy season. And of course we can relate it to Torah, and it's so beautiful and meaningful, and like I'm all for assigning meaning to things. But I think the reason why a lot of us like don't remember year to year why some of these things are is because there isn't really a great like concrete answer. There's a bunch of different interpretations that are like good. I think maybe we're assigned after the fact, so there was already something existent, and then after the fact we're like, let's put some meaning on it, or yeah. So okay, so with that I will and also sorry, I know most of you have been in a class with me before, but as always feel free to ask questions, and I encourage you to share your thoughts, both if you want to go off mute or if you want in the chat to write something, and I'll try and stay on top of the chat in that way as well. So there we go. Any first thoughts or things before we dive in? Cool. Okay, we're gonna do it. So we have a few sources. Let me make sure that I have the correct thing. No, that's the wrong one. Okay. Okay, here we go. Share screen. I feel like I have to give you the play-by-play when I'm trying to share my screen so you know what's happening. Okay. Here we are. Let's talk Lag BOmer. I will zoom in a little bit. To let someone in off the waiting room. Okay, my computer's unhappy with me right now, but that's okay. Okay, so just to give us some background before we go into our laser text. So just to get a sense of where this idea comes from of the Omer being this period of mourning, because in the Torah, it's not there in the Torah. I could have included the source, but I knew we'd be short on time, is about just counting, and we count from this period of Passover to Shavuot. We count the 7 weeks, and so that's all it says, right? There isn't a lot of like meaning assigned to the Omer at first, but then as time goes on in the Talmud, we get some other like meaning kind of smushed onto the Omer, and then as time continues to go on, we get more meaning smushed on by Jewish mystics and the Kabbalists. Anyway, so here we have, this is a piece of Talmud from Tractate Yevamot, and here is just kind of a background of, okay, like why is the Omer the period of mourning, or like when we talk about, and I think I know a lot of couples that I've talked to that are like around my age first hear about the Omer when they're trying to get married, and they ask a rabbi, right? Yeah, I see some nods, right? They ask a rabbi, oh, can we get married on this day? Are you free? And the rabbi says, no, I can't marry you. That's the Omer. And like, that's a lot of times like the first time people hear about this, which I think is I don't know. It's something I ponder a lot. Like what? But anyway, so right, there's like that's the big reason why people know about the Omer as a period of mourning. It's like, oh, I can get married in these dates in the spring that I wanted to get married on. But anyway, so where does that come from? Where does this idea that it's a period of mourning, that we don't do weddings, and there are other practices, right? Like some people won't get their hair cut during the Omer. There's also this idea of like, I know some people won't like shave. So there's this whole concept of like the Omer beard. And again, that's right, a sign of mourning. And like people who are actually in mourning, often won't shave and things like that. So where did that all come from? Well, here we go. So Yevamot 62b. And would someone like to read? You see it? Okay, I'll read it for you all, and then the next one someone can think about reading. Okay. It was said that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of disciples from Gabat to Antiphras, and they all died at the same time because they did not treat each other with respect. The world remained desolate until Rabbi Akiva came to our masters in the south and taught the Torah to them. And it was they who revived the Torah at that time. These were Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Judah, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. And it was they who revived the Torah at that time. A Tana taught, so this is someone who's kind of like an earlier stage around the time of the Mishnah. A Tana taught, all of them died between Passover and Shavuot. Rabbi Chama bar Abba, or it might be said Rabbi Chia bar Abin said, all of them died a cruel death. What was it? Rabbi Nachman replied, diphtheria. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, and we're not necessarily going to unpack it all today in this particular class. We'll do another one sometime. But right, so this idea is Rabbi Akiva is a great rabbi. I love Rabbi Akiva. He's like the Jewish version of a patron saint. I'm not sure what we would call that, but the patron rabbi, I don't know, of adult education, because right, Rabbi Akiva is this great sage, but he didn't start learning till he was 40, right? So I always love that. So anyway, so Rabbi Akiva, this great sage, he had 12,000 pairs of disciples, right, 24,000 students. And here this text says that they all died at the same time because they did not treat each other with respect. So there's this idea that it was like a plague. There was a plague there and they all died, and all of them died, right? This Tana statement here that I bolded, all of them died between Passover and Shavuot, which is the period of the Omer. So this is kind of our source text for this idea of the Omer as a period of mourning. And you'll notice here that there's nothing about Lag BOmer in there. And there's really nothing about Lag BOmer in the Talmud. I like did a lot of research. And I was like, where did we get the source for Lag BOmer? Like, what's going on? Because it's not there. And we'll see that in a moment. But yeah, so anyway, so the short of it is, right, there's this mourning period because 24,000 of these disciples died all at the same time. Now there's interesting kind of commentary on this that I'm just going to mention, and if you want to like go down a Wikipedia rabbit hole later, like you should, but there are people who interpret this as actually it was not a plague. This is actually referring to the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which is a time where the Jews kind of like rose up with the leader Bar Kokhba, and Rabbi Akiva was actually a big supporter of Bar Kokhba, of this person who like claimed to be the Messiah and was going to like lead the Jews to victory. And so of course he went along with it, and so maybe that was a reason why all these students were killed, and it was kind of preserved in the Talmud in this way. So it doesn't have a clear connection to the Bar Kokhba revolt, but maybe that's what they're talking about here. So lots there, but we're not gonna super go into that. But I just wanted you to see kind of this is what we're mourning. And I don't know, I mean, in some ways it like feels a lot more relevant now, like to think about a plague where a lot of people are dying. It's like, unfortunately, right? So it's but yeah, so the Omer was a time to like set aside to like grieve this huge loss, because it's people, and it was like these Torah scholars, and yeah. So any kind of questions or thoughts on this first piece, or things that were unclear? I know there's that whole middle part that I did not really address that I probably won't, but yes, Stephen.
Oh, just the historical interest. The artifacts from the Bar Kokhba revolt, his name was not Kokhba, it was actually Kosiba. But perhaps his Hebrew name may have had something to do with the Hebrew we have for it. But it was actually, it was not Bar Kokhba, it was Bar Kosiba was the actual name of the person. So just from a historical point of view, it was interesting. That wasn't known until about 20 years ago when they found some artifacts from that era.
Good to know. Thank you. Yeah. So lots of interesting stuff about that. I know we should do like a Jewish history lecture. That's not my strong suit, but it's like so interesting. Yeah. So there we go. Anyone else? Okay, great.
Can I ask you a question? So it seems to me that this holiday should be a big deal. Like, 12,000 pairs of people died, but it's a really minor holiday. Outside of people who attend shul regularly, I don't think anyone knows what it is, except maybe you get blintzes on Shavuot at the end, and people don't know at the end of what. So why is it not a bigger deal, a bigger holiday, if we're remembering so many people who died?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Madeline. I mean, I think, right, this idea of remembering all these people who died with the Omer, I mean, there are people who are keeping those traditions of like not getting a haircut on the Omer and things like that connect to it. But I think honestly, it's kind of like in some ways like Tisha B'Av, in that there are these like really horrible things, but they happened so long ago that I feel like it's hard to, keep a connection with it, right? Like I have a lot of trouble, right? So what we were talking about earlier, when couples approach me and ask me if they can get married during one of these days of the Omer, and for me, I know like I'm gonna say no, but also I have trouble because I'm like, why, right? Like I understand that this was like a tragic thing, but it was so long ago, and like I have trouble relating to it in that way. And I mean, sometimes I'll try and relate it to something in current times that can help me like better understand. But yeah, I feel like there are so many tragedies, and sometimes I have trouble like connecting with them. And so I think that might be part of it. But I think also there's not a lot to do during the Omer, right? You're just like counting the days and not doing a few things. So it's not like something that is so kind of exciting for people, I would say. But if anyone else has thoughts on Madeline's questions, happy to hear your thoughts as well. Someone asked me, I just got a chat, that why did Rabbi, sorry, I'm going to do this and then if someone's raising their hand, sorry. Why did Rabbi Akiva not intervene with his students if he saw they were not treating one another with respect? That's a good question. So yeah, that's a really great question about Rabbi Akiva. I mean, I don't think there's a good answer in the text. I think we could think about like, why didn't he, or maybe he wasn't there to make sure that they were treating each other with respect, or, as much as we want to think that like the teacher is responsible for the students or has control over the students, I think oftentimes the teacher has only, can have some influence, but only so much. So yeah, so I think it's interesting because you're kind of like implicating Rabbi Akiva in this, which I think is totally fair. We could also take a favorable reading of Rabbi Akiva of like he taught and he did the best he could, and his students like were still fighting. Or it was maybe something Rabbi Akiva taught that made them not respect each other. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of kind of calamities that happen in Judaism, like in the Talmud, that are explained by people not treating each other well. And like that also, again, ties into this Tisha B'Av connection, but there's explanations of why was the temple destroyed in Jerusalem, and some say because of baseless hatred, sinat chinam, right? So it kind of has that similar idea of people like not being nice to each other, which is really interesting to reflect on and think of, like, why is that the thing that the rabbis are trying to explain all of these things with? Yeah, great question. And then so why would teaching Torah in the South correct the problem? That's a great question. I mean, I think here, like, the rabbis are really concerned with like Torah study, and so in some ways that if they can, keep the Torah going, it's helpful. But there's more to that. And then Someone also said to me, I believe Bar Kokhba means son of the star, and it was a messianic name he took or was given to him for Bar Kokhba. Yeah, I think so too. Oh, I just realized that you can only chat me. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. That's like a, here you go. Now you can all chat each other and everyone, and you don't have to just send it to me if you don't want. If you want to continue to send it to me, you can too. Okay, great. So Lag BOmer. I had that, like, I had the chat locked down for another thing I was doing. So I did a lot of looking, and here is kind of the original source, or a written example of the source for Lag BOmer, because it was obviously kind of around, or like people were talking about it. You know, there was an oral tradition about Lag, right, the 33rd day of the Omer. But in this first text, there's nothing about Lag BOmer, about things stopping before Shavuot on the 33rd day of the Omer. It just says they all died between Passover and Shavuot. Okay, but here we get the Meiri. This is Rabbi Menachem Meiri. He was a rabbi in Spain from like the end of the 13th century, I think like 1249 to like 1315. So yeah, so a lot later than the Talmud. And here's what he writes. He says, there is a received tradition from the Geonim, and the Geonim are like a generation or two, a few generations of scholars. So like a little bit before him. So, but it's like kind of the period after the Talmud. There's a received tradition from the Geonim that on the 33rd day of the Omer, right, that's Lag BOmer, the deaths of the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped. And we also have the custom not to get married from Pesach until this time. Okay, so we already talked about weddings, so we're over that. But right, so here, so there's somewhere it came about that Lag BOmer became this day, and so we have evidence of that here, which again is from like around 1300. So that's, 700 plus years ago, but not quite as old as our Omer traditions. But that's kind of where this comes from. So I don't know, I'm super interested. I want to like go on an archaeological dig or something and figure out like what's going on with this log, like where did it come from? Because I feel like it came from somewhere, but I'm not sure. So anyway, that's just me. Okay, so now we're gonna do our little rabbi with lasers, but first I'm gonna stop the share for a sec. Great. So okay, so then the question is, okay, so we talked about like getting our hair cut and getting married and all of those things on Lag BOmer, and that's because it's the period of mourning has stopped. But then there's other traditions. Right? There's a tradition about lighting a bonfire, and I don't know if you've ever been to Israel during Lag BOmer, but it's like, yeah, it's wild. There's like fires everywhere. So there's this tradition or this custom of lighting a bonfire, and the question is like, why is that? And this is another one of the ones that I feel like it's a drash, it's an interpretation, but the common explanation is that it's that Lag BOmer is the anniversary of this person, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, his death. And so why are we lighting bonfires because of his death? Well, because he brought light to the world. And to expand on that a little bit, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who we can call Rashbi for short, because that's much easier to say. So Rashbi is a rabbi in the Talmud who's also credited with writing the Zohar, which is the main Kabbalistic work. And even though he's credited with writing the Zohar, he didn't actually write the Zohar. The Zohar was written much later. That's agreed on by scholarship. But Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is connected to the Zohar. It was basically like to give the Zohar more authority and all of that. They like connected it back to someone old, which makes sense, right? That's what we always do. We're always trying to connect it back to something older, to something pre-existing. So it's connected back to Rashbi. And it makes sense because he's a pretty mystical person. We're going to see in the story. But yeah, so Lag is said to be the anniversary of his death. And so we light bonfires because he brought this light to the world. So now we're going to read about Rashbi and what's his deal. And this is the lasers you've all been waiting for, maybe. And this is kind of oops. Okay, so it's, we got, there we go. Okay, so This is a good story. This is from the Talmud, from Tractate Shabbat 33b to 34a. And yeah, I'd ask, will someone read it for us? Or start reading. You don't have to read the whole thing. I'll interrupt you as usual. Yes, Stephen.
And Shimon, who denounced the government, shall be killed. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Elazar went and hid in the study hall. Every day Rabbi Shimon's wife would bring them bread and a jug of water, and they would eat. When the decree intensified, Rabbi Shimon said to his son, women are easily impressionable, and therefore there is room for concern lest the authorities torture her and she reveal our whereabouts. So they went and they hid in a cave. A miracle occurred.
We'll pause here. So a little background of the story is, so basically a bunch of these a few rabbis, including Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, were talking together about the Romans and about all the stuff they had done. They like built all these bathhouses and things like that, and built the city and built bridges. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was totally trashing the Roman government. And he was like, it's all terrible. Like this stinks. They're bad. Like they built the bathhouses and they're dirty and they're for prostitutes and like things like that. And so, people overheard him and reported his treason to the government. And so because of that, right, he got in trouble and they said, you're going to be killed. And so, okay, he goes to the study hall and he's kind of like hiding out in the study hall. But his wife is like helping him, by bringing him food and all of that. And then Rabbi Shimon gets nervous that his wife would give him away. Of course, I think he's mistaken, but whatever. I mean, it's always helpful to have less people in the know. So they wanted to take the wife out of it. So they went and they hid in a cave. Okay. You want to keep going, Stephen?
A miracle occurred, and a carob tree was created for them as well as a spring of water. They would remove their clothes and sit covered in sand up to their necks. They would study Torah all day in that manner. At the time of prayer, they would dress, cover themselves, and pray, and they would again remove their clothes afterwards so that they would not become tattered. They sat in the cave for 12.
So we'll just pause. Sorry. Great. Okay. So we have this, like, I think really incredible picture of like what's going on, right? So they're in this cave. They miraculously have food and water, so they don't have to worry about that. And they like sit in the sand all day. They literally bury themselves in the sand and study Torah. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son. They're stand and they study Torah, and then at the time of prayer, they get up, they get dressed, they pray, and then they go back into the sand, right? And so they didn't want to wear out their clothes, so they would just bury themselves in sand. Yeah. So there you go. Any kind of thoughts, questions up to this point? Yeah, sure.
This sounds kind of silly, but why would they care about their clothes? They're going nowhere anyways. Like for 12 years, they're going nowhere. So why would they care that their clothes are okay?
Yeah,
up to their neck, which I don't know how they did it, because without a shovel or whatever. This sounds a little preposterous, but we'll go with it. Okay. It seems a little, yeah. The cave, yes. The cave part, yes. The sand, I don't know about.
Yeah, it's definitely a really interesting image of like, okay, why did they care? The closest thing I can come up with, and maybe some, and I'm happy to hear other people's thoughts on this as well, is that they cared about their clothes because there's certain ideas around like what you have to be wearing when you're praying, right? So there's certain ideas of modesty, like you can't daven while you're naked, right? So if all of their clothes were destroyed, then they wouldn't be able to pray because they wouldn't be able to like cover themselves.
So what was the purpose of hiding in the sand up to their neck? Animals can come and bite them, eat them. Like,
yeah, I think.
Am I not getting the right picture here?
You can, I think my picture is more like idyllic. Like they're like we're in this like world where a carob tree magically comes up and they magically have food and water. So like I feel like the bears are taken care of, the mosquitoes are taken care of. We're just like living in an idyllic little cave world. And there's somehow magically like enough light, right? Like there are lots of things that are
Were they smoking then too?
maybe, you know what, maybe very that could have helped them pass the time when they spend 12 hours in a 12 years, sorry, in a cave. But yeah, I mean, I think the sand up to their necks is also a modesty thing, right? So even though they're not clothed, they're still covered, right? Because again, rabbis are into modesty. So there you go. So they're making sure they're covered. But I feel like there's more to it, right? I feel like it's symbolic. I feel like they didn't have to tell us this detail of, oh, they took off their clothes and they buried themselves in the sand, right? That's superfluous. So I don't know. I'd love to hear from other people. Like, what do you feel like is going on with this idea of them being buried in sand? Is it kind of what's it trying to connect us to, or not, or what's it evoking for you? Yeah, Stephen.
Very simple. I think very naively think they just want to be hidden. They didn't want to be exposed, or if any Roman troops or whatever just came by and, or any regiments were going by, they just didn't want to be obvious in any way.
Mm. Yeah, it could be like a camouflage thing. I don't know. I wonder if it's at all connected, and maybe not, but the expression of like burying their heads in the sand, which I know is exactly the opposite of what they're doing, but is there some type of like hiding from reality in almost a like naive way going on here? I don't know. Want to have thoughts on that?
And I guess also they couldn't be distracted by anything, and they couldn't be worried about being stuck in the cave or that they're being hunted, or they're buried in sand just to focus on studying Torah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that definitely, right? Like they're kind of creating this environment where they're almost like, we talk about sometimes about being floating heads, right? I talked about that a lot. I heard about that a lot when I was in my last job at Hillel, because we talk about like student well-being, and how a lot of times in university, right, it's like they're floating heads. We treat them like floating heads because we're thinking about, okay, what are their academics and how are they doing and how much are they learning, when actually like none of us are floating heads, and we all have bodies, and how are we taking care of ourselves physically and all of that stuff. And right, and is this also that kind of they're covering themselves in sand to be like that floating head, and they're kind of denying their bodily needs, or just that they have the body to kind of be totally in this space of like studying Torah and all of that. Okay, Eric says it could be a setup for what comes next. Their physical connection to the earth does not help them connecting to others later when they come out of the cave. Ooh, foreshadowing. Yeah, and then we got Michelle and Isaac. It's a sensory experience, being completely aware of their bodies in contact with the sand. Oh, okay. So that's kind of like the opposite of what I was saying, is actually it's connecting their whole bodies to studying Torah. Because if your body is covered in sand, yeah, you can like feel the weight. Yeah, this is making me think of like going to the beach when you put like sand on your legs, or sand wherever. Yeah, that maybe actually it's the opposite, that there is something about that. Yeah, nice. Thank you. Okay, so we got that. We got the sand, so we can keep that in mind as we go on with the story and see if, yeah, we do want to connect it back with, or connect it forward. Great. Okay. Stephen, do you want to keep going?
They were there for 12 years. Elijah the prophet came and stood at the entrance to the cave and said, "Who will inform Bar Yochai that the emperor died and his decree has been abrogated?"
Great. Okay. So they were in there for 12 years, which is like, that's a long time. And then we have Elijah, who, right, the character who kind of comes in and just lets people know things. He's like a great kind of plot device in the Talmud, right? So he comes and he's there, and it's kind of like that, like, who's gonna tell, like, wink, 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 right? Who's gonna tell Bar Yochai that everything's fine? because obviously that's what he's trying to do. But yeah, so that's how Rashbi, how Shimon Bar Yochai finds out that the emperor died. So right, he's no longer in danger of being killed because the person who decreed that he would be killed is now dead. So he outlived the emperor. Great. Okay, so now what happens?
They emerged from the cave and saw people plowing and sowing. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, these people abandon eternal life of Torah study and engage in temporal life for their own sustenance? The Gemara relates that every place that Rabbi Shimon and his son Rabbi Elazar directed their eyes was immediately burned. A divine voice emerged and said to them, did you emerge from the cave to destroy my world? Return to your cave. And again, they went and sat there for 12 months.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so here we got the laser eyes. Okay, right. So we have, so they emerged from the cave and they saw people doing, physical things to take care of their bodies or like money, right? Engaging in everyday tasks, plowing, farming, all that. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is so mad because he's literally been in a cave for 12 years and all he's been doing is Torah study. And he's like, I can't believe all of these people are abandoning Torah study to engage in all these things that, why? They don't matter. It's for their own sustenance. That's not important. And so he's so mad. And he also has, kind of like they've been studying Torah for 12 years. So they have almost like special powers in some way. And so he everywhere they direct their eyes were immediately burned, which I take to be laser eyes. I don't know. You all can disagree with me, but like, come on, right? That's the picture, like lasers shooting out of their eyes, burning all of the crops and everything. So they're destroying everything. And then there's this divine voice that comes out and says, did you emerge from the cave in order to destroy my world? Return to your cave. So right, there's this idea that there's a rebuke to say, okay, this is not okay. You can't just destroy people's crops, but also to say the rebuke is also that it's actually important for people to engage in these temporal things, in farming, in sustenance, and that actually Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Elazar are in the wrong here for going after them. Yeah, Stephen.
Sorry, a couple of things, Rabbi. I have another engagement I have to go to,
Okay.
but this passage, and I hate to say it, but it sits a little bit difficult for me when I apply it to the ultra-Orthodox who are in their yeshivas. I mean, I don't want to make this a black and white thing, but when you see the Roshei Yeshivot coming around asking for donations so that we can keep yeshivas, whether it's Jerusalem, whether it's here, open, so that these kids can study Torah and have no worldly interests or occupations and depend on the rest of the Jewish world to support their learning. Why is that not used by these Rabbanim, these ultra-Orthodox sects? Why is this passage totally ignored?
Yeah,
When I have a big problem with kids sitting, doing nothing, and having no connection to the outside world for sustenance for their own families. It's relying on the women to do the household thing and on the rest of the Jewish world to support their learning when they have no outside. I mean, to me, this is the prototype explanation of why that's the wrong. To me, that would be inconsistent with the Talmud.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of the question you're raising is something that's been going on, that is a tension that actually we see in the Talmud. We see in a lot of places where rabbis, right, there are times where the rabbis saying, okay, rabbis should have an outside trade. Like you're not a good rabbi if you're not doing something else as well. And there are times and passages we see where there's actually like glorification of people who've like just sat and studied and dedicated their lives to study. And I think that's a tension that continues to exist of like, yes, we subscribe a lot of value to Torah study, but then, yeah, where does that stop? And who has the responsibility to continue Torah study, and the value that that brings versus, making sure that we're engaged in supporting ourselves and all of that. And I think that's a tension we see in the communities where, people just study Torah all day. But I think we see it in a lot of places as well. Sharon?
I have a question. I don't know for you or Stephen, is that the studying of the Torah, like the yeshiva boys and all that. I don't know the question, so it's a question. It's not rhetorical of any sort. Is it because they believe that the more you study the Torah and everything, that it's better for the Mashiach to come? You're doing better in the world? Like, what is the purpose of always just studying the Torah? What is the goal? If that's
and I don't want to go thank you for your question. I don't want to go too far down this hole, but I'll say there's a value. Judaism ascribes a value to Torah study, both as a mitzvah, but also to kind of uncover new insights and all of that. And there's a belief that Torah study can help sustain the world. And so if you take that really literally, that's really important what they're doing. If you take that less literally, less important, right? So
because the world stands on three things, right? The Torah study,
Torah, Avodah, Gemilut, Chassidut.
Exactly. Okay.
So, but we have a lot of, right? So there's a lot of arguments in both camps, and I think Judaism ultimately, in most things, come down on the side of kind of balance, trying to balance it. But you could definitely read extremes into the text. And I see we have a chat from Michelle and Isaac. Thank you. It's technically heat vision. Okay, it could be lasers, it could be heat vision. I support that. It could be fire coming out of your eyes. Yes, I love the reference to the comics. But I really feel I don't know, this gave me vibes of I picture a comics character, or something. I feel this would be a good little movie or something. Okay, so I want us to keep going. So right. So they have to go back. They go back into the cave, and they're there for 12 months. And okay, now we need a new reader who wants to read. I'll even tell you where we are.
I can read.
Awesome, Bonnie. Okay.
They said the judgment of the wicked in Gehenna lasts for 12 months. Surely their sin was atoned in that time. A divine voice emerged and said to them, "Emerge from your cave." They emerged. Everywhere that Rabbi Elazar would strike, Rabbi Shimon would heal. Rabbi Shimon said to Rabbi Elazar, "My son, you and I suffice for the entire world, as the two of us are engaged in the proper study of Torah."
Awesome, thank you. So here, okay, so they've been in their cave for 12 months, repenting, thinking about what they've done, and they said, okay, that's enough, right? They're allowed to come out again. And Rabbi Elazar is still, right? He hasn't done his tshuva. He hasn't done his proper learning. He's still mad when he sees people farming and things like that. And so he's, still with his lasers or his heat eyes, right? Destroying everything. But Rabbi Shimon has reflected enough to understand that that's also valuable. And so he's healing. So he's kind of cleaning up the messes that his son is making. And then he says, Rabbi Shimon, right, he says to his son, he's like, it's okay that they're doing that because we've been doing Torah. This kind of ties in almost to Stephen's question, right? Since we've been studying Torah, we're helping, we're doing it for them, right? Because we're engaged in the proper study of Torah, where we just study Torah all day. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to keep going?
I had to unmute myself again.
Okay.
Also, I have to make it bigger because I can't see it.
Oh.
Okay. As the sun was setting on Shabbat Eve, they saw an elderly man who was holding 2 bundles of myrtle branches and running at twilight. They said to him, "Why do you have these?" He said to them, "In honor of Shabbat." They said to him, "And let one suffice." He answered them, "One is corresponding to remember the Shabbat day to keep it holy, Exodus 28. And one is corresponding to observe the Shabbat day to keep it holy, Deuteronomy 5:12. Rabbi Shimon said to his son, "See how beloved the mitzvot are to Israel. Their minds were put at ease, and they were no longer as upset that people were not engaged in Torah study."
Awesome. Thank you. Right. So, okay. So we have this, I love this little story piece. Right. So, okay, they've made it out of the cave, and the sun was setting. It's, Friday evening, and they see this person who's holding 2 bundles of myrtle branches, right? This man who's running. And they said, okay, like, why do you need 2 bundles, right? Like, I'm thinking that it's some type of like decoration for Shabbat. And like, okay, like, why do you need 2? Like, isn't it enough for you to have 1? Who needs 2 bundles of these branches? And this man says it's in honor of Shabbat, because 1 corresponds to remember the Shabbat day, and 1 corresponds to observe the Shabbat day, which that might sound familiar. In Hebrew, it's Shamor and Zachor. And we talk about this when we talk about why do we have light 2 candles, talk about in honor of 1 being Shamor and 1 being Zachor, right? So here the man is saying, okay, he knows enough Torah to say this, and to value it, right? He values what he's learned enough to say, okay, I'm going to make sure that I get 2 bundles for Shabbat. And Rabbi Shimon said, right, see, like, this is important enough for this person. Like, let's not belittle these people, because actually they are engaged in mitzvot as well. And then their minds were put at ease, and they were no longer as upset that people were not engaged in Torah study, because they see, okay, people are living a life of mitzvot, even though it looks different than their life. You don't have to be studying Torah in a cave all day to live a great and worthy life. Yeah, so there you go. And there's also like another epilogue that I didn't include. Maybe next time we do this story, I'll include the other epilogue as well. But yeah, so also to kind of connect it back, and then I'd love to hear some thoughts on this whole story. But to connect it back, people say that when he was in that cave, when they were in that cave, studying and doing whatever they were doing in there, that was when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the Zohar, right? Even though he didn't really, but like that would be a good time for it to happen. So that's what it happened. Yeah. What are we? Yeah. Any thoughts, reactions to this? So it's quite a ride of a story. We have a cave, we have burning the world, we have this nice little afterpiece about Shabbat. I think everyone's quiet today. Here, I'm gonna like go back to our so I can see all of you. Oh, why Myrtle? That's a good question. I'm not sure. It might just be
The only thing that was around.
maybe, or maybe I want to look into it. I want to see if like Rashi says anything about it, but nothing that I know off the top of my head about why. That's a good question as well. Yeah, I heard, I listened to a lecture the other day by Hadar, through Hadar, which is great if it's a Jewish like learning yeshiva type thing, but it's like an egalitarian yeshiva. And they're doing this lecture series on, they're calling it, I think, the Torah of reopening. And the person teaching it is Rav Tali Adler. She's awesome. And she actually closed her first lecture with this story, because it was, she's talking all about like, what does it mean to reopen and to go back into the world? And I thought the way she read the story was so interesting, because she kind of took it as like those 12 years in the cave are comparable to what we're doing. I mean, not that we're 12 years in a cave, but this idea of that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Elazar were like cut off from the world in a lot of ways for an extended period of time. And then when they came back into the world, right, it was not so pretty. Right? And kind of using this story to think about, and I know it's like not here yet, but as we're like thinking about this idea of reopening and coming back together, to think about what's the wisdom in this story, to think about how it can be really difficult to do that re-entry process and come in and, you know, how are we going to be like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Elazar, where we're like shooting lasers, like what is that equivalent? But I think it's also just equivalent to like the struggle that it's going to be to reacclimate and also kind of those growing pains of like what's going to stay the same and what's going to change. And then eventually, right, they're able to kind of find support in each other. And I think that's another piece that she really drew on, is like Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar, when they come out the second time, right, they're able to help each other reacclimate, right? Rabbi Shimon is kind of repairing what Rabbi Elazar is messing up and is burning. But their companionship and their ability to support each other is what helps them to stop and to continue to kind of move forward. And yeah, so I think there's like a lot of really interesting parallels for that and worthwhile thinking about is, and then kind of she tied in this like Shabbat piece of it, of thinking about, okay, what are those things that we can find meaning and joy in as we kind of like look out to the future, and that's an example of that, of like that simple thing that we can attach meaning and joy to, and doesn't have to be like a whole big thing, but right, what are those practices that are like grounding? Yeah, so there's that. So right, so there's this like whole connection to Lag BOmer with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he's in the cave, and there's like the tension between like, you know, being kind of cut off or being in almost like a monastery, what's it called, like monastic tradition, there we go, like, you know, cutting yourself off and kind of and being siloed versus being a part of the world, and right, that value of Torah study versus kind of sustenance, money, parnasa, all of that, right, earning a living, that tension. There's just like there's so much good stuff in this story. So yeah, I'd love to hear any thoughts, reactions to any of that, or anything, any questions that are coming up.
Well, I was thinking of a couple of things. One is tolerance. They seem to lack that, and they made, you know, judgments very, very quickly. And also, I guess they came to realize when they stepped back that, you know, someone can be looking after their sustenance, but still, you know, be interested in mitzvot and studying Torah, so they can still have that balance in their lives. Yeah,
definitely. Thank you. And they raised up that point of like empathy, which is so important. And they're definitely, I think, at first lacking, and then eventually, I think through meeting that man who's carrying the myrtle branches, are able to start to cultivate more of that empathy. And yeah, thank you, Bonnie. Other thoughts, reactions? Had you heard this story? Is this like a new text for you? Had you heard it before? Got some notes, some sums.
No.
No, it was very fascinating, and it really does give you a lot of different things to think about. Thank you.
Yeah.
There is a lot there, like you summarized at the end.
Yeah.
A lot of issues.
Yeah.
Is this the only interpretation of it, or is this the one that's mostly acclaimed?
Yeah, so this is the story in the Talmud. Of course, it is a translation, so there's like that interpretation of, you know, how we translated the words. This is the Steinsaltz translation that I took. But yeah, this is the story. I mean, I'm sure there are other kind of like flourishes on it, but this is the like original one.
Okay.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yes, Eric said, I think I might have taught this text before, and you know, I might have like last year for Lag BOmer taught it. I was thinking about it as I was preparing for this year's Lag BOmer. I was like, did I teach this last year? But then I was like, you know what? It's like the Torah, where you can come back to it, and hopefully, you know, we see something new and different.
which one would you go with? The one where they died of the students, they died from diphtheria, or would you go for the one that the Romans came in and slaughtered them all?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think,
That was the one that I would teach, like I was teaching to the early child, like I'm an early childhood teacher. Well, I wouldn't say those words. I just said, in the bad role, I mean, make it very nice. But I didn't, the diphtheria one never came into play. I've never heard that one before of a disease or anything.
yeah, I mean, sometimes it's translated as like croup. I don't know. I'm also like, I don't know really what these diseases are. I know like Michelle wanted to tell us.
Like they killed, if everybody's dying on the same day, unless it was an act of God,
Yeah.
in my opinion, it would have to be the Roman, it would have to be, the army coming in and just slaughtering everyone.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
like I think that one,
I'm
I'm not
taking too literally, I'm sorry.
No, it's like one, I'm not entirely sure that this stuff like historically happened, right? There's always that question of like, did this really happen? And to me, I'm not so interested in that question. Like, I think maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I'm interested in what are the stories being told around it, and what are the rabbis trying to teach us? And so I think that both
Okay.
both interpretations have something valuable to teach us and to say. And maybe the Bar Kokhba one is actually like more historical and maybe more likely to have happened. Great. And there's stuff to learn about that and what it means to have a rebellion, and a way of mourning that, right? And mourning the rebellion when maybe they felt like they couldn't outwardly mention the rebellion because it's dangerous to mention a rebellion in your text, because then they think that you're rebellious people, and that's kind of problematic for whoever else you're living under, right? So there's that piece, which I think is very much there. And then the piece of the plague, I think also, right, there's a lot to learn about, okay, they ascribed that plague to being because they weren't treating each other with respect. And so how important is it to make sure that we're treating each other with respect? I mean, I think that we have like a really new and deep understanding of what it means like to be in a plague. And I think, right, seeing that our tradition also has that understanding in some ways. I don't know, to me, sometimes it feels like comforting of like, I'm not the first person to live through a plague. Like we have a lot of plagues actually in our tradition and in the Talmud, and kind of in our Jewish texts. And so I think that both of those ideas and interpretations are valuable, and there's what to stand on for both. Yeah, any other thoughts, questions? Is anyone going to light a bonfire? Will someone please light a bonfire? Yes, Michelle. Yes, please. That's all I want. I just want people to light bonfires. Roast a marshmallow for me if you yeah. In a few months ago, I was like, we're gonna do fires for Lag BOmer, and I like looked up, because there are different places you can kind of like rent or reserve a fire pit, and then yes, outside this time. Yes, definitely be outside. Yeah, but obviously I couldn't rent a bonfire or fire pit right now. But for all of those of you who have one already, amazing. Now's a perfect excuse to go have a bonfire and indulge your inner pyromaniac and have fun with that. Cool. Any other last thoughts, questions?
Not a question, but just a comment. At our school, we take more. We used to do the bonfire and everything as well, but now we're concentrating on the hair cutting. Oh. So we have tomorrow. Actually, we have about probably, I think, 10 to 15 at least kids who are going to be cutting their hair, and of course, over this time, our hairs have grown a lot. So we've concentrated on that more so. I don't know whether that, I mean, you mentioned about that, it's about the mourning and the cutting and all that sort of thing, but wonder if there's any other significance about hair or the cutting.
Yeah, I love that.
I mean, when I was in Israel for Lag BOmer, I went to the cave, what's it called?
Oh, up in Meron?
Yes. And every picnic table had like tens of people with all their little boys getting their haircuts. So it was really incredible.
Yeah. So there's the tradition of, the first haircut at 3, and certain people will go and do that on Lag BOmer up in Meron, which is said to be where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried. So there's like a lot of stuff that happens up there for Lag BOmer. But yeah, I think I was thinking, like, I was telling people, I was like, if you're thinking about impulsively cutting bangs, like, do it today, because Judaism says so. If you want to shave your head, do it today. But yeah, I think definitely, if you want, I was thinking about I've been giving myself haircuts. I have like hair clippers now. And I was like, maybe I should do it because I can't light a bonfire, but I think I'm trying to grow out my hair. So, but if anyone else wants to, yes, that is encouraged as well. Give yourself a haircut. It'll be great. You can do it. Awesome. Well, we are at time. So thank you all for coming and learning with me and getting in that Lag BOmer spirit. I know I feel a little bit more in the Lag BOmer spirit now after learning with all of you. And yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What's the greeting for Lag BOmer? Is it Chag Sameach or what's the greeting?
I don't know. Some people say Chag Sameach, but I feel like it's not really a Chag.
No.
I don't know. I just feel like I would just say Happy Lag BOmer. I know it's
Okay.
Yeah.
Happy Lag BOmer.
Happy Lag BOmer.
Very much, Rabbi.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.